They say kindness is the best gift you can give, but what if that gift turns into your worst nightmare? That's exactly what happened when Janice posted this chilling status on Facebook, begging for help, saying she and her siblings were under attack. What no one knew at the time was that this cry for help would spark one of the most horrifying and shocking cases the Philippines had ever witnessed. The case was so disturbingly gruesome and eerily bizarre that it's compared to a famous movie. And by the time you reach the end of this video, you'll be questioning every act of kindness you've ever given, and just how horrifying it can be when it falls into the wrong hands. To really get the picture, let's head over to the small, quiet town of Malang in North Cotabato, Philippines. It's a place known for its calm vibe and rural charm, where life moves at a slower pace. People here are deeply connected to the land, relying on agriculture for their livelihood, growing staples like rice, corn, and vegetables. In this peaceful town lived the Magwad family. Unlike many others, they led a pretty stable life. Cruz Magwad, the father, was an elementary school teacher. He was well respected and loved by everyone, constantly being praised for his hard work. A promotion was even on the horizon, which meant he was doing pretty well financially. His wife, Lavella, was the principal at the same school. Together, they didn't make crazy money, but they were considered one of the more privileged families in town. Their youngest child, Louis, also known as Boy Boy, was 16. He dreamed of becoming a lawyer, even at his young age, and he was determined to work hard to get there. Aside from being smart, he was also creative, playing guitar, drawing, and reading in his spare time. Gwen, his older sister, was the more intense one. Super smart, driven, and goal-oriented, she had always been this way. As a kid, she was a Girl Scout, and her sash was covered in so many badges that there was no room for more. Gwen didn't just stop there. She enrolled in a pre-med prep program during high school and planned to become a doctor. By all accounts, Gwen was the type of person who would sit with you at a party if you were feeling shy, sticking by your side until you felt at ease. That's exactly how she met 17-year-old Janice. But unlike Gwen and Louis, Janice's childhood was far from happy. She wasn't privileged enough to attend school and had to work from a very young age. Even worse, she grew up without parents. Her first real memory started when she was around 8 years old. Before that, everything was a blur. She only remembers being found by a stranger, wandering alone on a huge shipping container boat. Her parents were nowhere to be found, and Janice believed they had abandoned her. The stranger was kind enough to post her picture and name online, trying to find her parents. They shared her story on Facebook and various online forums, but no one ever came forward. Eventually, Janice was dropped off at the Philippines version of CPS, the Department of Social Welfare and Development, where she moved from one foster home to another. Not long after, Janice was offered a live-in nanny job by a family. Though she hated the job, she was incredibly grateful for the opportunity. Janice shared all of this with Gwen, and Gwen was so deeply moved by her story that an idea began to form in her mind. An idea that could give Janice the safe, loving home she deserved: adoption. Gwen, together with Louis, decided to present the idea to their parents like a well-thought-out thesis. They approached the subject with serious dedication, telling their parents that adopting Janice wouldn't just change her life, it would help their family too. They convinced their parents that Janice could pitch in with the chores around the house, which was a big deal in their Asian family culture. It wasn't uncommon for children to share the responsibility of washing dishes, cleaning, and cooking. With one more set of hands to help, the family would run more smoothly. Gwen's parents weren't exactly rolling in money, but they believed in teaching responsibility. The kids had chores, had to keep their grades up, and attend church every Sunday. They were strict, but it was out of love, and Gwen and Louis respected that. That strong connection gave Gwen and Louis the courage to ask for something as big as adopting Janice. In 2021, Janice moved in, and it was like she was instantly part of the family. The Magwads welcomed her with open arms, Lewis even gave up his own room just so Janice could have a more comfortable one. They enrolled her in school right away, and for the first time, Janice didn't wake up with the constant worry of finding food or going to work. She was finally allowed to be a kid. As Janice settled into her new life, the bond between the three siblings grew stronger by the day. You could see the happiness shining through, especially in the videos they posted on TikTok. Janice even got to experience a family vacation for the first time, something she had always dreamed of. Laughter filled the air as they explored new places together, creating memories she would cherish forever. For once, Janice felt like she belonged to something bigger, something safe, and full of love. But just when everything seemed perfect, Janice's world was about to shatter. On the 10th of December that same year, she posted a series of statuses on Facebook, claiming that she and her siblings were under attack. It was just days before Christmas, a time that should have been filled with joy. But instead, it was the beginning of a nightmare. At that time, Mr. Cruz, the father, was at school, doing some chores related to the upcoming holiday. Lavella, the mother, was away on a work trip. But everything changed when Mr. Cruz received a phone call that left him frozen in terror. The voice on the other end told him that their home was being ransacked, and his children were there. By 3:15 in the afternoon, Cruz finally arrived at the house. It was eerily silent. Outside the front door, his eyes locked onto a blood-soaked blanket on the ground, with a knife nearby. He called out for his kids, but there was no response. He moved quickly to the back door and managed to find a way inside. Cruz moved rapidly through the house, his voice echoing off the walls as he searched for his children. It wasn't until he entered the living room that his worst nightmare became a horrifying reality. There, lying on the floor, was his daughter Gwen. A towel soaked in blood was wrapped around her body. Her limbs and torso were covered in multiple slash wounds, but it was the injuries on her neck that were particularly severe. Crime scene photos later revealed the gruesome extent of the wounds. Her flesh was torn apart, and ants had already begun to gather on her body. Not far from Gwen, near the main door, Cruz found Louis. His hands and feet were bound, and a gag covered his mouth. His body was riddled with fresh stab wounds. The amount of blood suggested the attack had happened just moments before Cruz arrived. But there was one more person missing, Janice. Cruz's heart pounded as he continued to search the house, calling her name. Then, finally, Janice appeared. She emerged from her room, her hair wet, her face pale and shaken. She was in shock, barely able to speak. Seeing her, Cruz immediately called the police. The officers arrived soon after, stepping into a crime scene that would later be described as one of the most gruesome in the Philippines. Blood pooled on the floor, and the house bore the marks of extreme violence. Janice, while trembling, told the officers that they had been attacked. The house was in disarray. Cabinets had been pried open, and personal belongings were scattered across the rooms. At first glance, it seemed like a robbery. However, investigators knew that appearances could be deceiving. They needed to confirm whether anything valuable had been taken to solidify the robbery theory. At the same time, as part of their protocol, the police didn't rule out the parents as persons of interest. They needed to confirm their alibis and whereabouts during the attack. The investigators turned their attention to the room where Janice said she was hiding during the attack. It was messy, but that wasn't unusual for a robbery scene. What stood out, though, were the details that didn't add up. The disarray in the room, though chaotic, didn't have the usual signs of a real robbery. So, the police began to search the house more carefully, and they soon found some crucial evidence. Just outside the front door, the police discovered a blood-stained shirt, which they believed had been dropped by the attacker while trying to escape. And about 100 meters away, they found a plastic bag in a ditch. Inside it were bloody pants and underwear. It seemed like the attacker had deliberately thrown these items away to hide evidence. Inside the house, the scene was increasingly horrifying. Near the front door, officers found a knife with a broken handle, its blade slick with blood. The living room floor was littered with shards of glass and broken bottles, a clear sign of the violence that had unfolded there. Expansive pools of blood painted a grim picture, revealing the brutal nature of the attack. Among the carnage, investigators discovered a discarded machete, a baseball bat, and a hammer, each stained with blood. These weapons were assumed to be used in the murders. Crime scene analysts took careful note of the blood patterns, which provided key insights into the sequence of events. They determined that Gwen, the older sibling, had likely been killed first. Her blood had partially coagulated, and rigor mortis had already begun to set in. In contrast, Lewis's blood appeared much fresher, suggesting he had been murdered shortly after Gwen. The different states of the blood and bodies made this theory even more plausible. Louis's hands and feet were bound, while Gwen's were not. This discrepancy indicated that Gwen might have been ambushed and killed quickly, while Lewis was restrained, likely to prevent him from resisting before his own murder. The variety of weapons found at the scene, ranging from a broken knife to a machete, baseball bat, and hammer, raised troubling questions for the investigative team. The fact that so many different tools were used, and that the victims had distinctive types of wounds, strongly suggested the involvement of more than one attacker. This theory was supported by the fact that Louis had been restrained. It would have been difficult for a single person to control a victim while also carrying out such a brutal attack. Adding to the mystery, Cruz, the sibling's father, confirmed that the weapons found at the scene were his. The murderers seemed to have used tools that were readily available in the house, which made the crime even more unsettling. By the way, I post true crime and new cases here every week, so if that sounds like your kind of thing, please consider subscribing. It helps a lot. As investigators continued to gather evidence, they found something that stood out. The family's laundry machine had been used, but there were no freshly washed clothes anywhere in the house. This odd discovery suggested that something unusual had happened after the crime, perhaps an attempt to erase evidence or cover their tracks. The extreme brutality of the crime prompted local authorities to launch a manhunt for the suspects. The public was shocked, and the need for justice became urgent. To help with the investigation, the vice of the Municipal Council of Malang, North Cotabato, announced a reward of 200,000 pesos for any information leading to the capture of the perpetrators. The mayor also offered an additional 50,000 pesos as a bounty. These actions emphasized the gravity of the case and the community's desperate need for answers. An autopsy was performed on Gwen and Lewis, spanning 2 days, starting on December 13, 2021, and the results were chilling. Gwen had sustained 32 stab and slash wounds, some of which were deep enough to almost sever her limbs. One of her ears had been cut off, and her neck and upper arm were nearly severed. Her body also showed signs of blunt force trauma, likely caused by the hammer and baseball bat found at the scene. Additionally, the backs of her hands were bruised and covered in defensive wounds, indicating that she had fought fiercely until the end. Meanwhile, Louis had endured 51 knife wounds, some so deep that they exposed his bone and internal organs. Red marks on his neck suggested he may have been strangled. Unlike his sister, Lewis had no defensive wounds, implying that he was caught off guard and unable to fight back. He also had signs of blunt force trauma on his limbs and torso. All these injuries were consistent with the weapons recovered at the scene. Investigators quickly ruled out the possibility of a robbery gone wrong. The scene had been staged. While the rooms appeared ransacked, only Gwen's phone was missing. Nothing else of value had been taken, leading authorities to believe that the killer or killers were familiar with the victims. It was also striking that the crime took place in broad daylight, which made the entire situation even more unsettling. Before the autopsy results were made public, rumors began circulating online, accusing Janice of being involved in the crime. These rumors gained traction due to her survival, the weapons being from the family home, and the locked front door. The accusations grew increasingly intense, with some even threatening Janice. Under the mounting pressure, the police decided to question her. Janice described the events of that day. She had been studying with Gwen in her bedroom while Louis was downstairs in the living room. Suddenly, they heard Louis screaming, and 3 men broke into the house. The 2 girls rushed downstairs and saw the 3 men attacking Louis with the weapons found at the scene. The attackers then turned on Gwen, and in fear, Janice fled upstairs, locked herself in the bedroom, and hid under the bed. She was too scared to call the cops, so instead, she texted the family group chat asking for help. Later, she messaged her adopted mom saying, "Mom, help." When no one saw those messages, Janice went a step further and posted on social media saying, "Help! Somebody has broken into the house. I don't want to die. I'm hiding in my room. Help!" After a few minutes, she deleted the post, worried the attackers might see it and come after her. She tried calling her mom, but there was no answer. By the time someone saw the post and reached out to her mom, Janice was too scared to pick up. She went as far as changing her social media username and turning her phone to silent, clearly trying to hide. When the house finally fell silent, Janice emerged from her hiding place, too afraid to go downstairs. She claimed she took a shower and changed clothes to calm herself, finishing just as Cruz arrived home. But there was something odd about this part of the story. Janice had told the police she locked herself in her bedroom the second the attack started. So why did her room look like it had been ransacked? That raised some serious questions. More importantly, Janice's version of events was directly at odds with the forensic evidence. The autopsy results and the way the injuries were distributed made it clear that Gwen was the first victim, not Louis. This major discrepancy between Janice's account and the evidence made investigators even more suspicious. Something wasn't adding up, and they started to take a closer look at Janice's statements. At first, she told the police her phone was off during the attack, but Cruz remembered calling her phone and hearing it ring with no answer. When Janice was confronted with this, she changed her story again, now claiming that she had been in the shower and hadn't heard her phone ringing. This was starting to sound fishy. In a case like this, who on earth could actually take a shower while their siblings were being attacked? It's just hard to wrap your head around, right? But that wasn't the only thing that raised eyebrows. Cruz also revealed some things about the murder weapons that added fuel to the fire. The baseball bat used in the attack originally belonged to Louis. He had kept it in his room on the top bunk as a kind of protection. But after being adopted by Cruz, Janice had taken over the top bunk. The hammer used in the attack was another tool that Cruz kept around for home repairs. He was very careful about where he kept it, usually hiding it behind the washing machine. Cruz mentioned that only 3 people knew exactly where that hammer was: himself, Gwen, and Janice. This meant that the killer or killers had to have known the family's routines and possessions really well, almost like they had been living in the house with them. Things got even more suspicious when a delivery driver came forward. The driver had arrived at the house just 18 minutes before Cruz was contacted by a neighbor who noticed no one had answered the door. The driver kept calling out, hoping someone would respond. Eventually, he noticed a woman peering at him through a door before she suddenly walked away. The woman's identity was never confirmed, but it raised serious doubts about where Janice was and what she was doing during the crucial moments of the attack. Another key clue came from the front door. It had been locked from the inside, and there were no signs of forced entry. This was a big deal because it meant that whoever had done this was probably someone who was familiar with the house, someone who had access to a key and could lock the door after the crime. At this point, it's pretty clear that Janice had something to do with the murders. However, since Janice was only 17 years old, still a minor under Philippine law, the police couldn't arrest her without solid proof. This legal issue made them tread carefully, as they couldn't move forward with an arrest until they had more definitive evidence. Instead of arresting her right away, the authorities placed Janice under the care of the Social Welfare Department, while the investigation turned to finding out who actually committed the murders. If Janice's claim about other people being involved was true, the police had a lot of work ahead of them. 5 days after the murders, a significant breakthrough occurred. The police discovered Janice's fingerprints on the murder weapons. This was a huge deal, but it wasn't the smoking gun. After all, Janice had lived in the house where the weapons were stored, so her prints could have been there simply from handling them. Still, it was a lead they couldn't ignore. To ensure she wasn't treated unfairly, Janice was given a lawyer by the Social Welfare Department. But things took another unexpected turn when Lavella, Janice's adoptive mother, found a contact tracing form while searching Janice's room for clues. The surprise? It wasn't Janice's form. It belonged to a 17-year-old boy named Esmeraldo Aldo Canedo Jr. Aldo was a sacristan at a local church, and Janice had known him from the orphanage. This discovery sent the police scrambling to figure out if Aldo had anything to do with the murders. And soon enough, witnesses came forward, confirming Aldo had been near the crime scene on the day of the killings. One woman said she saw Aldo drop Janice off near the house right before the murders, and another neighbor said she saw him asking for directions to the house that morning. When shown a picture of Aldo, the woman immediately recognized him. Then on December 16th, 6 days after the murder, Janice, with her lawyer present, gave a full confession. She admitted to being involved in the murders along with Aldo and her so-called 21-year-old boyfriend, who was unnamed. Janice explained that her motive was deep resentment and jealousy. She felt that Gwen and Louis were getting all the love and attention from their parents, and in her mind, they were standing in the way of her getting the affection she had longed for. She even confessed that killing them would leave her as the only child in the family, guaranteeing she'd get all the love and attention she'd recently started experiencing after being adopted. Janice revealed that her ultimate goal was to take Gwen's place in the family, driven by years of emotional neglect in the orphanage where she had grown up. By December 18th, Janice's confession was officially recorded, though it was inconsistent, much like many of her previous statements. The police tracked down Aldo, who voluntarily surrendered, admitting his role too. Forensic analysis later confirmed that blood found on discarded clothing in a ditch belonged to Aldo. Like Janice, Aldo was a minor, so he was placed under the care of the Social Welfare Department. Later that same day, in an unrelated drug raid, police arrested a 17-year-old for possession of illegal substances. When they searched his phone, they found something that tied him to the case: Gwen's stolen cell phone. The serial number confirmed it had been taken after the murders. The police pieced it together. Janice had enlisted Aldo to sell the phone because she couldn't get rid of it herself due to growing suspicion. Unfortunately, the phone had been water damaged, making it impossible to retrieve any useful data. The boy who had the phone wasn't involved in the murders. He had simply bought it from Aldo. Because Janice and Aldo were minors, the police couldn't release any juicy details about their confessions to the public, despite the parents pressing for information. As the investigation progressed, Janice stopped cooperating, making it even harder to figure out exactly what had happened. Later on, it was revealed that Janice's 21-year-old boyfriend was just her imaginary boyfriend, and that really makes you question everything, especially since she had further stated that there were 3 people involved in the attack. Some people believe Janice's confessions weren't even the full story. Whispers circulated that the murders were even worse than she had let on, like the possibility that Louis was tied up and forced to watch as his sister was murdered before he was killed as well. After the shocking confessions, Lavella, the siblings' mother, was interviewed and reflected on the warning signs she missed. According to Lavella, they had adopted Janice 5 months before the murders. At first, everything seemed fine. The family welcomed her, and she appeared grateful. But soon, small red flags started to show. In August 2021, when Lavella's parents were hospitalized with COVID-19, crews noticed that 10,000 pesos, about $170, set aside for emergencies was missing. Janice claimed thieves had taken it, but the next day, a large sum was found hidden in her school bag. After some questioning, Janice admitted she had taken the money. Despite the breach of trust, the family, particularly Gwen, chose to forgive her. They were sympathetic to her troubled past, chalking up the theft to the survival instincts she had developed after years of hardship. Janice apologized, and the family, hoping this was a one-time mistake, accepted it, believing the worst was behind them. But as months passed, Janice's behavior started to shift in unsettling ways. Once known for her strong work ethic, which had been one of the reasons the family adopted her, she became lazy and irresponsible. Household chores were neglected, and when reminded, she apologized but never followed through. While troubling, it didn't raise any immediate alarms until the morning of the murders. That day, Janice did something she had never done before. She called Cruz and Lavella Mom and Dad for the first time. It was a small gesture, but it felt like a red flag, an indication of a deeper, darker shift in her emotional state. It was as if something had clicked in her mind, and what was about to happen was set in motion. As the investigation unfolded, more shocking truths came to light. Janice had lied about her origins from the start. Her story of being an orphan was a fabrication. Her parents were alive and had spent years desperately searching for her. When the case went viral, Filipino amateur sleuths dug into her past and uncovered a nearly decade-old missing persons notice. Like I mentioned earlier, Janice was discovered by a stranger in a cargo boat back in 2013, but no one could recognize her at the time. Her parents, especially her mom, weren't really active on Facebook back then, so they missed the post. Fast forward to the murders, and that same post started making rounds online again. It didn't take long for Janice's biological parents to recognize her. Born in 2005, Janice was the youngest of 3 kids, but her childhood was filled with chaos. Her dad's gambling addiction tore the family apart, and her mom, after remarrying, tried to make the best of things by splitting up what little they had left for her kids. Eventually, Janice and her siblings were placed in different orphanages. By 2020, Janice had actually reunited with her biological family, but that didn't last long. Her relatives later claimed she cut them off, saying they were too poor to be of any use to her. That betrayal shocked everyone, but things took a darker turn when Janice's biological mother, devastated by what her daughter had done, attended the funeral of Gwen and Louie. In her grief, she kept apologizing, full of guilt over her daughter's actions. In one heartbreaking moment, Janice's biological mom even kneeled down, but the Magwad parents weren't out for revenge. They made it clear that they weren't angry, just seeking justice. They insisted that Janice's biological mom encourage her daughter to confess. Janice's mother tried to visit her at the social welfare office, but Janice refused to see her, citing strict rules. Then, the investigation took a jaw-dropping turn. Evidence surfaced that suggested the murders were premeditated. Screenshots of a conversation between Janice and an unknown person went viral. In the messages, Janice confessed that she wanted to kill her siblings, thinking their deaths would give her the freedom she craved. She even wondered if anyone would still accept her if she committed murder, expressing a chilling belief that no matter what she did, God would forgive her if she just asked. Some sources later claimed that Janice often talked about the 2009 horror movie Orphan, a film about a young girl adopted by a family who ultimately betrays and kills them. She even posted on Facebook that she loved the movie and watched it repeatedly. When Janice's trial began, her behavior was just as disturbing as the crime itself. She was seen smiling and laughing at her parents, showing no remorse or regret. Cruz and Lavella, devastated by the loss of their children, said in interviews that they might have forgiven Janice if she had shown even a hint of genuine remorse. But her coldness only made their pain worse. The case became a national sensation in the Philippines. From March 2022, when Janice and Esmeralda were officially charged with murder, To their conviction on May 17, 2022, the case was closely followed by the public. Janice was sentenced to 31 years in prison, while Esmeralda received a 29-year sentence. However, both sentences came with one condition. They would serve them under the Department of Social Welfare and Development supervision until their 21st birthdays, after which they'd be transferred to adult prisons. Gwen and Lewis's parents had mixed feelings about the trial's outcome. While they recognized that the courts handed down the toughest punishment possible under the law, they felt the laws were too soft. The biggest issue, though, was Janice's complete lack of remorse. Cruz and Lavella were outspoken against Republic Act 9344, which limits the legal accountability of minors. According to the law, the minimum age for criminal liability is 15, and individuals between the ages of 15 and 18 can be held accountable, but they're sent to youth centers or rehab programs instead of adult prisons. This law prevents minors like Janice from being tried as adults, even for heinous crimes like hers. Many argued that kids shouldn't be capable of planning or committing such brutal acts. In the U.S. and other countries, minors committing these kinds of crimes would have been tried as adults. Cruz and Lavella felt strongly that Janice's age shouldn't excuse her from taking full responsibility, especially for such a violent and premeditated crime. This view was shared by many who felt the law was too lenient in cases like this. The couple publicly called for changes to the law, wanting those who commit violent acts at a young age to be held fully accountable. For them, the law's focus on rehabilitation rather than punishment made them feel that the justice system had failed their family. Some of the most heartbreaking facts to come out of the investigation revealed that Gwen almost escaped. She had the chance to run, but when she heard Janice calling for help, she went back, hoping to save her adopted sister. What makes it even more disturbing is that Gwen's kindness, her willingness to return to help, was met with betrayal. Now it's your turn. What's your take on this case? Do you think the sentences were too light for the suspects? Or do you believe the justice system got it right? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. If you like the way we create these videos and you want to help bring more cases like this to light, hit that like button and subscribe for more deep dives. Thank you once again for watching.